sure everyone has the opportunity to join. So I appreciate the patience while we work through those. This is the kind of first part of a two-part virtual charrette. We'll be doing hopefully an in-person when, in the future when we're able to do so. This part today is really focused on what the arch would look like, on the ground in the future. The idea being that any of the objective or policies that we have in the master plan would eventually translate to something that is actually tangible on the ground. The other part two, there's a link on the site where you registered for this, where you can go in and actually read and comment on every objective and policy. It's more for anyone who wants to address specific policies in the master plan. So you have the ability to do that. There's some videos to help provide some context. And then you can just basically have open comments on everything. I think we've already kind of gone through the staff today, so we won't necessarily do that. I'll just say that we have a lot of different divisions, a lot of different specialties and different departments represented. So hopefully we can answer questions that may come up. If we can't, I will do my best to find an answer and follow back up with you later. But at this point, I'll hand it over to Devin and Floyd to facilitate this, though I'm here to help answer any questions as needed.
Thanks, Arnie. All right, now that we've gotten through the fun part of getting all the technical stuff worked out, let's jump in. Does everybody see Floyd's screen as the main screen right now? Okay, awesome. Floyd, move your hands on there. Let's make sure you're working. All right, we got you, Floyd. So what we want to do is just to kind of jump into this. Where we've started is we really just kind of started looking at the map, and I just want to hand it over to Floyd and let Floyd kind of talk about where this map came from and kind of the concepts behind it. And then from that, anytime anyone wants to jump in or say anything about it or ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. If we start getting any type of feedback with the mics, we will mute and unmute. So if there is something you have to say, I'm looking at all the screens. Just kind of wave your hands if you're wanting to say something and no one hears you, or give me a thumbs up, and I'll be monitoring to see who's trying to speak. But with that, let me throw it to you, Floyd, and start talking about the map a little bit and how you came up with this map.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. All right, well, this is the map here. This black boundary here goes around, is pretty much the parcel boundary going around the property here. To give you a bit of context, this triangle area right here, that's Roberts and Mumford School up there. This is Roberts Road right here. Yeah, just kind of get everybody bearings. The north end of Miccosukee Trailhead is over here, near the kind of Crump Road area over here. This Miccosukee Road down here. This is I-10 right here. This is the Thornton Trailhead down here. This is Buckhead over here. So that kind of give everybody their bearings about it. And this, kind of future I-10 change here. Where this map came about, basically, we get requests all the time from various folks that own properties throughout Leon County, whether it's someone that has a 2-acre lot that they want to build a house on for themselves, to anyone that has like thousands of acres, such as in this case here. They come in and they'll say, hey, I've got some property, I'm kind of looking at it. Kind of, want to know what some options, what can I do? Can you help me with some ideas? And that's a service that we provide to anyone and everyone in the county. And this is treated no differently. And that's basically where this map came from. Basically, what we did is we started out with just some of the really basic high-level information. Like we said, okay, well, if you want to look at this and kind of like start, doing like a conceptual bubble plan of what you might be able to look at and what you can't look at, and that type of stuff. We said, okay, well, let's kind of get all the constraints on the table. So we started out with like the floodplain, the wetlands, a lot of the most environmentally sensitive areas where, you can't touch them at all. And said, okay, let's get all those highlighted on there. Then we said, okay, well, let's look at, kind of some of the existing context. Of course, you got the school, got Miccosukee Greenway here. These 3 stars here are roadway crossings or roadway access points that were negotiated when this property, transferred property ownership from the family to the greenway that we all know and enjoy and use today. And so these were fixed points that were negotiated at that time. There's been talk about doing the overpass over I-10 somewhere in this area. And so we said, okay, well, we'll just put something in the middle for now as kind of a placeholder. And then there's talk about the blueprint project going somewhere north, south, wherever that final alignment ends up being. So that's why we showed this on here. is okay. There's talk about some type of north-south connection. Where it ends up being is yet to be determined, and that's still going through the process. Somebody's
Devin.
crossing. Go ahead.
Devin, can I interrupt you for a second? You there?
Yeah. Well, this is Floyd talking, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
Is
I'm
this
sorry,
Rob?
Floyd.
Go ahead, Rob.
I'm sorry. Since I'm not looking at your map, I'm trying to find it. I've got, I think, the old map that was on the original master plan.
I just emailed you the map, Rob.
Pardon me?
I just emailed you the map a moment ago, so you should have it in your inbox.
No, I think I have the right map, but it's the same one that was originally in the master plan. Is that what it is? I mean, I think I'm following along what you're showing here, but let me ask you this. Let me just point out some. You mentioned these stars. Were you mentioning these stars along Miccosukee Road between I-10 and Crump Road?
Yeah, there's 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Okay. Well, just for clarification, only one of those was in the original purchase of the Greenway, and that's Miles Johnson Road. These other 2 are proposed, I guess, by you. Is that right?
Well, they're not proposed by me. Maybe Robert could provide some clarification, because when we worked through
Well, I don't mean
this,
by you personally, but I mean it was part of your plan. These are brand new access points on Miccosukee Road. Is that correct?
well, this right here is the driveway that the existing property owner uses today, and this right here is there's another driveway cut that's used from it, presumed for access into the property to manage the woodlands and things like that.
Floyd, because he's not looking at you as you point to him, will you just let him know, like, if you're at the east?
I'm familiar with where the Welaunee Road access is, and I think I know where this is, across from Kimberly Hills, where the or maybe it's Argyle, where where there is a road that you can see with a gate on it. So I guess that's where that is. Okay,
Sure.
so
They're existing.
these were not part of the original purchase. These were not part of the original purchase of the Greenway. Okay, let's just clarify that part. All right.
Okay, and I'll clarify that
Okay,
these are not being proposed by the planning department. That these were were things that are placed on the map through information that was provided to us at the time. The planning department did not propose these locations, so that's being clarified.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
These roadways here, these are just kind of secondary roadways. Whether they happen, it may or may not happen. But when we showed crossings like this, we looked at aerials and said, okay, well, there's existing dirt road that maybe goes through some of these lowland areas. If you were to do a roadway that actually crosses through some of these areas, it makes sense to use an existing dirt road that's already there rather than, mow a new path through the woods. And so we pointed out things like that. We said, it makes sense to maybe have some secondary connection somewhere over here that lines up the road. In this case, it's shown at Shamrock. We laid out the Greenways master plan where they're showing like the perimeter Greenway around the property, and said, okay, well, let's put that on there. And then, what's left essentially is the color shaded in the purple, kind of tan, and kind of the orange, and said, okay, if you're going to, do anything, look at any areas to like do any kind of project development, whatever, it'd be limited to these areas here. And then given the, the thought process that obviously not 100% of this would be developable. It's like, this is the area you have to work with them. And then some of that is, based on, environmental constraints, conditions, topography, stormwater requirements, all that kind of stuff. Then, your area that you'd actually impact would be, shrunk down even further as it moved further in the process. So that's kind of just got us to today where it's just a really high level, very loose conceptual bubble map. And in no way of any of these lines, anything on here are fixed. I mean, I think probably the most rigid line on here is essentially the boundary of the 100-year flood, which is, this kind of teal color that you go over here. And yeah, go ahead.
I think Pam and Debbie may each have a question right now.
Okay, go ahead.
Pam, you're muted if you want to go first, Pam. Still muted. There you go.
Oh. Okay, there.
You're good.
Are those to the on Miccosukee, are those part of the 1990 agreement? Where did they come from?
Talk about the 3 stars here.
Yeah, the Miles Johnson one is that Rob said was part of the part of the Miccosukee Greenway purchase agreement. Is that true, Rob? The one
Yes,
with Miles
that's
Johnson?
true.
Okay,
Yeah,
Yeah,
what about
that's
the,
this one
easement.
right here. And this is information that was conveyed to. Go
where did
ahead.
it come from?
Yeah, they're
Where did
for,
it
they're
come
for
This is
easement.
Robert Volpe. I can answer that question.
Oh, good.
Hold on one second. Pause for a second. I think Robert can answer that. Robert, will you speak up on that one for us?
Yes, I can answer that question. And Rob is correct that in part, that the connection at Miles Johnson in the Greenway plan, the Greenway plan allows for a crossing of the Greenway at Miles Johnson. The development agreement allows for 3 connections to Miccosukee. They're not at fixed points, but it allows for 3 connections to Miccosukee and 2 connections to Centerville. Obviously, the most logical place is where the Greenway allows a crossing at Miles Johnson, and those other 2 connections that are shown on the map are conceptual, but those are locations that would not have to cross the Greenway to connect to Miccosukee. That's why they're located in that place. And they align with.
Yeah, and it, Robert, just to add to your comment, south of where that red line is, where those 2 stars are, the Greenway continues on the south side of the road, which is not necessarily displayed here. So where you're going to end up having these road cuts in this area is going to mean that they're going to dead end as a T right there. Okay, is that understood? This is a dead end T road that's going to end up at Miccosukee.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so Rob's point is that the traffic is going to come off that road and onto Miccosukee. It doesn't have any other place to go but onto Miccosukee. Is that right, Rob?
Right. That's correct. Probably going down to Thornton and try to get on that road.
Okay.
90, maybe.
Miles
Hopefully.
Johnson, depending on what happens there. Yes, okay.
Or Miles Johnson.
Yeah.
Debbie, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, I guess I've got a big process question.
Sure.
I've never seen planning done like this before. So this is a conceptual map, and we're all making comments on it and general comments on the master plan, which was also a very high level plan. And we're talking to the planning department, but is any decision the planning department makes subsequent to these conversations, is that binding on the property owner? I'm just having trouble following how this is just going to work in general. I mean, I see a lot of roads drawn on the map here, and apparently conceptual, generally speaking, but has there been a transportation plan? Will anybody pay for a transportation plan? At what point do these roads stop being conceptual so we have some idea of what really is going to happen on this property?
Okay. Do you mind speaking to that about where we're at with the comp plan and then moving forward where that will go?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Right now, there's a lot of different, stakeholders and interested parties and participants, and a lot of different efforts kind of going on at the same time. Part of the blueprint project, the Northeast Gateway, addresses that corridor specifically, as well as the perimeter trail. There is a separate coordination with the Department of Transportation regarding the overpass and the interchange with I-10. There's an entire different process that has to go through. Part of the Northeast Gateway also looked at the Shamrock connection. The other roads are conceptual at this point. Part of this would be just kind of looking at ways we can do this while using existing corridors and minimizing environmental impacts. But there wouldn't be a transportation study done here. When we start moving into the PUD, we would have to start looking at things like transportation concurrency, I'm sure MJ and John can speak a little bit more to the PUD process, and when that happens, and then as we kind of move closer to development, you start refining things like the roadway network. Level, it's not we wouldn't do a full-blown transportation study just because it would just be based off of the maximum allowable versus what would actually be built.
And you don't have any idea how many PUDs this piece is going to be divided into, or which one's going to be developed first? How can you do coordinated and comprehensive transportation planning when you're going to have a series of PUDs develop and you haven't had a transportation plan yet? Or am I missing the sequencing? Am I getting the sequencing wrong?
I mean, at this point, we would be looking like more broadly at coordinating transportation and putting in parameters for the PUDs, just to make sure that each PUD actually does connect, kind of like pieces of a puzzle, and so you get kind of the big picture at the end. But in terms of determining specific alignments, that's not quite at this level. So we're somewhere between kind of the just high level comp plan, where we would just put one color on a map and call it that land use category, as most properties are. They're just one solid color land use, but we're also not quite at the level of detail that you would get at a PUD or a site plan. I don't know. Sometimes it's kind of like being a teenager, where you're a little bit awkward. You're not quite a child, but not quite an adult, and so there's some growing pains, and you kind of work your way through it awkwardly. But we're trying to make it as less awkward as possible, kind of recognizing that we are kind of in like an in-between stage with the level of detail.
Well, that still doesn't tell me how you're going to have a comprehensive and integrated transportation plan. It strikes me that one needs to come first, and the puzzle pieces of the PUDs would fit in after you have a transportation plan that shows you how you're going to have all this stuff connected and how you're going to have proper traffic flow. I mean, you can't get a plan for developing pieces of this when you don't know where the roads are going to be. I mean, can you? I mean, this is kind of bizarre, I think, not just awkward.
I think this is Devin again. Artie, this sounds similar to the concern that we've heard in a couple of the other ones so far about looking at this regionally, from a regional stormwater perspective, from a larger NFI perspective. I think we add this transportation comment to that comment, and that way we're able to bring that back to the commission, saying that these are the regionalities that they really want looked at within this, and that way it would, I think, meet kind of what Debbie's asking here of how we move forward looking at that.
Yeah, and just say that kind of looking at this, we know that we want connections from point A to point B, and we know that there would be a certain number of places where the transportation system comes together, but it's not really possible to do a full-blown transportation study until you know at more of the PUD level what's going to get built. I'd hate to go in and say, well, we're going to just assume the maximum and all of these are going to be 8-lane highways, because that's not what we want. But we do know that we want certain connections and we want to distribute the traffic. So I think we can do something like this where as a PUD comes in, they have to make those connections from point A to point B and account for that in the PUD without knowing exactly what the overall transportation mitigation is going to be until we have a little bit clearer picture of what's going to happen in that PUD.
And who's going to pay for these roads if they're going to be built piecemeal as the PUDs come in?
The developers of the property, with the exception of the Northeast Gateway. It's the same as, if you were to develop somewhere else in town, if there's a plan for a connection through property that's been approved ahead of time, when that property develops, they would have to account for that.
I got Pam who has a question as well, and then Mike, I see you have a question. Let's get Pam on this one, then I'll get to you, Mike.
I'm looking at the text of the master plan, and perhaps this is part of the problem, is the text of the master plan doesn't really provide for the things that you're talking about, Artie. It says that the major thoroughfares shall be generally located and depicted in the Welaunee Arch map. So that means those are the locations of the major thoroughfares as expected. I mean, whatever you put on the map, the master plan says, you know, that's what you're doing. But there isn't any language in here that talks about how, other than the PUDs will make the final decision, but to Debbie's point, if there's a PUD that divides, you know, that most more the north mixed use point all the way over to 2 connections on Miccosukee, if that takes 3 PUDs to accomplish, see how there's any real controls in here about what the PUDs have to do. It says optimize mobility. I don't know what that means. I mean, I can imagine what it means, but we need to give it meaning. Let's say that. Energy definition. And I guess the bigger one is, I know you're well aware of this, that you put to achieve an internal capture of at least 20% of vehicular trips generated on-site build-out. That's a arch-wide number. So there has to be language in the master plan, and therefore some of that describes how the PUDs that come in, how a piecemeal part of generating of development that includes roads is actually going to accomplish this. And I think to Devin's point, we've been pointing out in these last 3 talks of at least 3 things that have those same problematic considerations. There's arch-wide intent and accomplishment that we're trying from the master plan about how that will be, what the end point is. In this particular case, there's at least one number, 20%, but it doesn't really talk about how we're going to connect all the roads. So I would say, to Devin's point, and it's not just a map issue, it's that there has to be mechanisms that describe for for stormwater. It can't be just saying a master plan will be created, a PUD will do this. It has to actually have much greater language to control how the PUDs will be required to do it and how you will accomplish the endpoints on the arch-wide pattern. So, and some of that will end up reflected on the map.
Yes, I agree. I think those are good points, and we can definitely go in and kind of expand upon those to really include the strategies on how we would do that.
Okay, that's important. Get the strategies of how we're going to accomplish through PUDs these broader goals. And I do think some of it, as we pointed out, requires actually having more information on the map in order to identify where regional stormwater facilities may be appropriate. So I think this plan has to include those layers so that you can write these strategies well.
Mark, I saw that you had a question. Do you want to unmute and go for that?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm hearing something I didn't hear the other day, and that is, well, a couple of things. One is that, you know, this map is the way things are now. It's not the way that it's necessarily going to be in the future, right?
The map that is drawn is conceptual, correct?
Right. Well, conceptual might not be the greatest word to use, because it sounds like that's a concept that you have. What I heard the other day, and what I'm hearing again, is these roads that we have that are dotted are just dirt roads that are already there, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Hey, well, some of these, and some of these here are just more of just, hey, let's just connect in point A, point B, somewhere in this general area. I think crossing the, you know, like wetland and stuff like that, we said, hey, let's show it at an existing dirt road.
And there's already a cut through there. But one thing I heard today that is a little bit alarming. So is the master plan saying that you got to have 3 feeder roads coming out of the arch? Is that what you're saying on the Miccosukee Road?
I don't think any of us said that. I think Robert mentioned earlier, it's like we talked about this Miles Johnson connection, and then there were 2 other connection points, you know, to be determined. And then we basically showed them an existing drive cuts, just to say, well, let's not, cut down trees and create a new drive cut on Miccosukee and try to space them out evenly.
Right, but I did hear the other day that the cut from the landowner's property and the Miles Johnson is only a half a mile, right?
This right here, this
That
is about
one and
half,
the one-
that's about half a mile, and then this is about a mile.
Yeah, so you're talking about having 3 cuts coming into Miccosukee Road, and I pointed this out the other day, in a mile and a half, and 2 of them are going into dead ends. One of them is actually going to a road. The other ones are just going into Miccosukee Road. And there's going to be one on Dempsey Mayo, already, right?
Yeah, that's off the map here, to the south.
Yeah, I know. I understand that. But, and what about Thornton? Is there going to be a feeder road to Thornton?
Yes, there is.
Okay. So I thought I heard somebody say this just a minute ago this morning from the staff or one of y'all saying that there's going to be 2 feeder roads on Centerville and 3 feeder roads on Miccosukee.
That's in the master plan.
That's
Rob, hold on one second, Mike. Robert, was that you that spoke about that?
Yes.
Yes, and again, this is Robert Volpe. I want to clarify that the agreement limits the number of connections to 3 to Miccosukee and 2 to Centerville. As it exists right now, any PUD that was developed could have a connection, as many as would be approved by concurrency to Miccosukee or to Centerville. The purpose of the agreement was to limit the number of connections. If you look over at Killarn, I believe there are along Centerville 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 connections. So the purpose of that agreement was to limit the number of connections, not to expand the number of connections.
Yes, as I recall, that was a maximum. That was a maximum number of cuts allowed.
Well, I think part of the problem here is there's also a failure to integrate the heel and the toe development in as we're talking about the arch. The arch is not separate from the heel and the toe, and especially along Miccosukee, most of these are connections to the heel in some fashion, whether they're across the greenway or not. I also think that there's not a real fear that a whole bunch of small PUDs are going to come in and start dividing up this land to build. This land is not really of value until there's road networks within it, and particularly on the west side until public monies are spent to build the Northeast Parkway. I don't think the landowners have expressed any interest. I mean, they want to phase it, so they don't even want anyone near where they live, which is this whole residential reserve, which includes those 3 Miccosukee connections.
That circle you just drew, the circle you just drew, is that the Metler? Where's the Metler house?
It's right about here. This is where they live.
Okay.
So I think the idea of a maximum is important. I agree with that, but I don't think we have to fear about a whole bunch of other ones coming in between now and when the master plan gets approved.
Just to pause us for a
Could I make a
Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on Debbie's observation and Pam's observation that the connectivity that I think is going to be essential for wildlife, for recreation between the various elements of this is critical. Artie, I am really happy that you at least are open to discussing wording that might actually give the developers some direction for how these might be done, even if it is conceptual. There are some huge issues with just the open space part of the plan, and also some, I have to say, some inconsistencies in the language. Some that actually kind of put this pie in the sky with everything is going to be connected and constructed in some connected and continuous network. And yet, as Debbie pointed out, if we're hoping that the developers are going to wise up to this and work together, I think we pretty much know that's not going to happen. So I think it's the time, and I really believe this is really more effective approach for the landowners and also for the potential developers to know that, some of these green pathways that are on this map right now could be those linkages. And we need to make some points about that and make sure that people understand how important they are. Thank you.
So just to pause us for a second, I know this one was supposed to go till 11:30 and we've hit 11:30, but I want us to get a full hour out of this. If no one has an issue with us going till 12, is everyone okay with us continuing this till 12 o'clock? So that way we can get the full hour? Okay.
That's fine with me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. With that, Sam, I haven't heard from you yet. I want to open it up to you starting at this point and see if you have any comments. And you're unmuted, so you can speak at will.
Oh, yeah. No, actually, I'm just learning and by listening and trying to, part of why I wanted to be on this was just so I could get it. I'm not getting enough through the newspaper coverage, just really understand what's going on. And so also because I'm still relatively new to Florida, the planning sequences and processes aren't as clear to me as they are in other places where I have a lot more experience. So I don't really have any questions right now. I just appreciate what everybody's been bringing into the conversation because that's just helping me get a better understanding of where this is. My understanding, though, is that this is a concept plan. There are no entitlements that have been established. There's a overall agreement, I guess, about sort of which is really a framework for thinking about how to move forward in terms of more planning. But at some point, I guess I do have a question. The discussion over the comprehensive plan amendment, is that going how much level of detail has to be in that comprehensive plan amendment? Does it have to include, could it be as conceptual as this? Or are you actually going to have to arrive at details? In other words, committed roads and streets and that type of thing.
Artie, I'm going to have to jump to you on this one and see if you can answer that for him. Will you provide that for Sam?
Of course. Yeah, the idea in the comp plan is that we set parameters for more detailed planning later. I think MJ could probably, and probably John Reddick too, speak to this more specifically, but when we look at something like Southwood was similar to this in that it was a planned development. And if you look at the maps in the comp plan, they're very high level. I think it basically just calls out, here's Southwood, here's Colin English, here is like 4 different colors. And it doesn't even get to this level of detail. So, and then I think the PUD for that was probably, or the plan unit development, which is actually where you kind of do the zoning and you get those entitlements really locked down, many hundreds of pages. Is that right, MJ? Do you remember how detailed that, or how many pages the Southwood PUD or PUDs are?
Yeah,
it's
MJ,
about 3 this thick.
MJ, can you unmute? There you go, MJ.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's a very large document. In my opinion, it's probably too large, but it has a lot of detail.
Okay.
What has a lot of detail?
The Southwood planned unit development.
Yeah, so if we look at kind of the way it works in Florida is we would have a much higher level comprehensive plan setting the parameters, and then like that super big Southwood PUD had to have a lot more detail than what the comprehensive plan includes. Though the Southeast Sector Plan, which is where Southwood is, includes different policies and objectives and policies that set the parameters for how those PUDs can be done.
Artie, is Southwood a single PUD? Just
yes.
one PUD for the entire property?
Yes, that's
so
correct.
How does that apply to this? I mean, is this going to be a single PUD?
It could be. We don't know yet.
It's very unlikely that this is going to be a single PUD. And Southwood was a large enough development that it was a DRI, as I would call it, and there was a vast amount of detail in it, and there were exactions for the property owners and requirements for the property owners. I don't see how this is going to work since we don't know anything comprehensively. I mean, this roadway network, if a PUD comes in off of Miccosukee Road and has a few hundred acres, are they going to build a road that dead ends at the edge of their property and then somebody in the next PUD picks that up? I mean, I don't understand at all how this is going to work. There's a great deal of detail and negotiations back and forth with St. Joe on Southwood, and a lot of things were defined, very much defined, including what they were going to do about public transit and transit stops. It had vast detail in it, and there was a lot of back and forth. The first Southwood DRI, the first agreement, the city commission turned down, and no one had ever turned down anything with St. Joe before, and it came in a second time. And there was a lot of negotiations, and everything was comprehensively planned because it was done one unit. This can be parceled off into 6 PUDs, and I don't know how you get a roadway network out of that, or a stormwater network out of that. I mean, your drainage runs and your stormwater system have got to be continuous to even be able to work. And this is very complicated property with all the wetlands and Dove Pond. So I just don't see how this is going to work at all. I mean, I'm trying to understand, and I'm hoping it's going to work. But I've never seen anything, a large piece of property like this, done this way before.
Oh, can the road, the core of the road system, is that something that in the current process could be committed to before you actually, I would guess, change the zoning to the way that, are PUDs overlays in Florida, or are they actually separate zoning designations?
It is a zoning designation. John, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sorry. That was giving me, there was a really loud vehicle going by. Wait a sec. Yeah, it's basically when you're establishing a PUD, you're establishing your own zoning district for that land.
Right.
You know, so in my opinion, something that is sort of differentiates depending on how it moves forward from other large PUDs and, you know, DRIs and things like that is the property owner itself, wherein like Southwood, you had St. Joe was moving forward as the developer on that, not looking to, you know, sell it off in segments and things like that
Right.
that I think probably made the comprehensive, you know, negotiations a little bit easier. So, you know, a lot of it will depend on how this is going to move forward, which, you know, Artie or other staff may know. I'm not familiar with that level of detail on how this is intended to move forward. But so I think that's a pretty critical thing when you get down to, by the time it gets down to actual permitting or things like that, as to who is the actual applicant moving forward with it. But, you know, for like Canopy, we have a development agreement in place that has already set out your roadway network. So the expectations there of what is obligated for the developer with each phase as it comes in. But even that one, you have a single developer now coming in. So
okay. So in this case, and I'm just trying to sort of figure out how the process works. And thank you for indulging me with these questions. I mean, so could there be the landowner at this point doesn't intend to be the developer? They're just trying to get the process moved to the point where they can sell the property.
They're not even the applicant. They're not even the applicant. The city of Tallahassee is the applicant. That's part of why this is so confusing.
Ah, okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. So, okay. So then a donor agreement, sorry, wrong world, go back in my planning world. The landowner agreement. Could that include I mean, in terms of moving forward, are you able to legally, as well as in the planning framework, to come to the landowners and have an agreement about this basic road plan that would then create sort of the DNA, if you will, of how the land itself will be developed, whether it's either developed as multiple PUDs or if it's developed as a comprehensive PUD. Is that something that's possible?
Artie, you want to speak on that from where you guys are at right now with comp plan?
Yeah, there'll have to be a couple more steps between now and even when the first PUD is allowed. And even in the draft of the master plan right now, it speaks to there has to be a stormwater master plan for the entire arch before the first PUD can be approved. I have to look and see exactly how transportation would work with this. Sometimes it's a little bit more confusing, but yeah, it's something I'll have to look into a little bit more. In terms of kind of dictating up front if it could be one PUD or multiple, I don't think we would necessarily be able to do that at this point. We do have developer agreements in place or development agreements in place that speak to who does what and how things are set aside. So, there's language in there that talks about, kind of what area is being donated versus what areas are being reserved. And so some of these corridors, it would have to reserve a certain amount of right-of-way for future roadways. And that's in the development agreement now. It would take some engineering to determine the exact alignment. And there's usually, a different process depending on kind of the order of magnitude in terms of what the environmental impacts are or what kind of roadway facility it would be. But the NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, and the way it's kind of translated in Florida as the PD&E process, the project development and environment process, outlines kind of your options for how you would go through the process of determining the exact alignment. And so those are separate processes. But what we do at this level is at least kind of make the general connections known so that can guide the future decision making for which alignment would happen and exactly where the corridor would go.
So is the current developer agreement with the landowner?
It is. It's between the city of Tallahassee and the landowner. It basically talks about how the city will make sure that water and sewer are brought to the property line. Throughout the development, it would be up to the actual developer to spread those throughout the property, but bringing it up to the property line will be the responsibility of the city. It talks about how certain roadway corridors will either be donated or reserved for future use and how that works. How electric will work through the community, since the city of Tallahassee owns their own electric company or their own public utility. They have certain ways, and so the city would actually be responsible for the providing electric through the property, but then there's connection fees to offset the cost of that and things like that. So it gets into a lot of detail of who's responsible for what. And the main idea is really, with this Northeast Gateway being built, we wanted to kind of look at this and make sure that we don't just end up with strip development for commercial and then just disconnected subdivisions throughout this property, and that the property owner, one, doesn't develop part of it now, which would be rural, and they can do 10-acre lots, or they could actually even request urban fringe, which would be 1 unit per 3-acre lots, because we really don't want to see additional septic tanks put in this area. This area is sensitive with regards to how it connects to other environmental features throughout the region, including Wakulla Springs and things like that. And so the idea is that between the city and the property owner working together, hopefully we can come up with something that's not what would happen just on its own.
I got two questions coming in from other speakers. First, I had Pam, and then I had Debbie right after her with her hand up. So Pam.
I constantly hear this argument, we can either do a bubble map or we must do PUDs. This is just not true. There's a whole lot of stuff that can go into a master plan. And to Sam's point, I think this is a very different and in Tallahassee and Leon County, because we haven't had this sort of weirdness between a development agreement that was done in the 1990s and therefore reflected the perceptions of what development needed in the 90s, hasn't really been updated, except to say that the right of way won't be given until a master plan is written. The only right of way in there, and Rob, but it's really not about that. It's not about these other roads. It's really about the thing that's being built by blueprint. But I keep hearing this, Artie, that we can either do bubble maps or PUDs, and there's nothing in between. And I think that is wrong. And part of this is because of this confusion. It says they do not want to be the developer. They want this phasing in this plan so that they don't have to deal with dividing up things into smaller lots and selling it off. And then the city who's the applicant. But I think the idea that there's this boogeyman out here and somehow it's going to divide into 10-acre lots is frankly never going to happen. This land is valuable to build the road. And I think what have to be, we're clearly demonstrating in all these conversations, substantial public dollars being put into master plan it well. So the individual PUDs are more plug and play, so they know what context they have to fit in. And I don't think it's planning department. I think it's the applicants. And so we keep getting told as the public that it's either all that stuff happens later, don't worry about it. Right now we just do bubble maps. But then we've been pointing out for the last 2 days and the last 4 months of talking about this. And Robert brought up a really good point about how important it is to understand what the interconnections of all these open spaces and wetlands are. Water master plan before a PUD. There's nothing in the current master plan document that tells us that will ever be achieved. And I would say master planning is where it gets achieved here. And so the city is going to have to recognize if they are the applicant for the master plan, they need to do some work before they allows the PUDs to come forward. A bubble map and a PUD, and that's what we're trying to accomplish for this master plan.
Thanks, Pam. Let's let Debbie jump in on her question as well.
Well, I haven't been in the previous discussions, and I'm not signed up for another one until like the 21st. So I have no idea what's been brought up in this. Before we run out of time today, I want to make a couple of comments that I don't know whether they've been brought up or not. Someone needs to tell us and show on this map where the main trunk line for sewer is, okay? Because if the city is obligated to serve this area with sewer and a PUD develops way up here north or east on Miccosukee Road, is the sewer trunk line even up there, or is the city going to have to go to the expense to run it all the way up there because the first buyer who wants to do a PUD is way further out? So, I mean, where are the sewer trunk lines that they can connect to right now? And the expansion is supposed to be logical and incremental and rational, and not just at the demand of the developer who might be anywhere on this property. Secondly, please let's not hear this 1 unit per 10 acres and septic tank boogeyman again. That is a scenario that is never, ever going to happen. So we need to stop talking about additional septic tanks up here. This, as Pam says, this is very valuable property, and that should not, that's a false choice, a false comparison, and we need to stop even reciting that. My second question, but it's the same question of comprehensive planning. If the PUDs can come in anywhere, how do you get the sewer line to it? If the PUDs can come in anywhere, how do you get a workable, coordinated transportation system? I mean, these are all the same questions. You need a master plan for this whole property and not let it come in piecemeal with PUDs. But the next question is, anybody talk to the school board about this?
Yeah.
Has anybody talked to the school board? One of the estimates said there were going to be, I don't know, 10,000 more students of high school age or something by the time we get the build out. Do you have a liaison with the school board so that they can at least have some notion of the capacity that's going to be needed? My grandson's at Childs right now, and I suspect that they're full. So where's the coordination with the school board so that they have an ability to plan and think and understand and comment on the capacity problems that are going to be caused by this development? And on large properties like this before, there has been allocation for donations of land for school sites. I don't see any of that being discussed now, but that's what planning is about. If the school board is not a stakeholder in this, and if they have not been contacted, there's a big gap in what's happening here. I just wanted to get that on the record since I'm, not participating in all these calls, and I hear they're booked up. So if I try to be a participant in an additional one to get some continuity of the comments coming in, that's probably going to be impossible or unlikely.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie, for your comments. We actually did have that come up on one of the other ones about the school board as well. So it's good to hear that echoed again and hear that multiple people are thinking about that.
I can provide a few hopefully helpful points for each of those. First, I'll say, the ones that have already occurred filled up pretty quickly. The other meetings are not full, so you should have absolutely no problem signing up for additional sessions if you would like to. And if one is full, you can still sign up for it. I've added people, so that's not a problem. Jumping to the sewer trunk line, currently sewer is available to the site via Buckhead. There's a trunk line that comes out at the northern part of that, and so that's there. Typically, we would also extend water and sewer lines along with roadway construction. So I believe that's a part of the Welaunee Boulevard extension as well. Those lines would run under the roadway, and that planning and implementation would occur concurrently. The school board is being coordinated with, I don't want to get into all the details of that, but they're not unaware of this. We actually coordinate with the school board on all comp plan amendments, and then even more so when we get to the zoning level or the PUD level and things like that. So I just don't want anyone to think that coordination is not happening. And then
what are you coordinating with the school board, Artie?
Right now, it's looking at like maximum build out and what the projected student population would be. The school board does a 5-year district work facilities plan, and so they have this kind of knowledge that this would happen in the future, but it's not going to happen within 5 years, so they're not necessarily planning facilities at the moment, but more and more coordination will occur. And then the last point I'll make is, the current entitlements for most of this land is 1 unit per 10 acres. And while we can hope and dream that it never gets developed that way, and I agree that it's valuable, if we don't do a process like this, and I think this master plan is going to get better through this effort. We've heard a lot of input today and at previous meetings that I think we can refine and really work on coordinating PUDs even more specifically. And so I think that'll happen and help. But if this were to not happen at all, if we were not trying to do this, that is what their entitlements are. And to think that they would never develop it at what their entitlements are, I don't want to say that's a boogeyman. I think that's a possibility.
It's okay. Such a long shot. Can we hear from the property owner rep about, this is so strange, the applicant is the city, but any further requirements that the planning department, after all these comments from the citizens, may wish to place on this property, how does that work with the property owner?
Robert, do you want to speak to that? And we
Does
are
the property owner have to agree?
Well, I can do my best to speak to that. I think that any further obligations would have to be negotiated with the city. One way to look at this is that the city does comprehensive planning citywide for existing properties, whether they're vacant or developed, across the city. This is a unique situation where it's a very large piece of property, so it encompasses multiple different possible uses, roadways, and green spaces, and other public facilities. So on a smaller scale, the city would do comprehensive planning with a designated land use and a plan with utilities, roadways, things like that. In this scenario, because this property is currently has a land use designation of PD, a master plan is the next required step. So that is the purpose for doing this master plan. The city, as the applicant, is along with all of their master planning that's in the comprehensive plan for the entire city. This is looking at where the facilities are currently located and where they intend to be located, and then what land uses are desired to be around those. So I think the coordination point is that this is a unique scenario where it's a large piece of property owned by a single entity, but the city's purpose in this is that the facilities, the connections, and the public services are how the city is looking forward at how this area of the jurisdiction will look in the future. So this is part of comprehensive planning, as are other portions of the plan. It's just in a unique scenario with one landowner of a large piece. But to answer the question about other obligations, I think that would have to be discussed and negotiated. I don't think that right now, I don't think there is a set framework for how that would happen. I'm sorry if that's not any more helpful than.
Well, so the city and the public could agree on something, and the landowner could simply say, no, I'm not doing that.
Well, it would depend on what the obligation is. I don't think that may be too broad of a question to say whether they could say yes or no. I apologize if that's not answering the question, but I don't.
For example, there's very likely going to need to be a new fire station. I mean, look at all this residential development here, and you know, up the MLC, the co-op has a volunteer fire department. Well, that's not going to be adequate to serve all the development here. It is extremely likely that there's going to have to be a fire station sited on this property. If we were doing this the way we always did with major landowners, there would be agreements for the landowner to donate X amount of acres for a fire station, knowing that there's going to have to be a fire station in the future, and water tap sites. And that's the way this always happens. And the property owner, knowing that these things are going to be essential to make the property marketable, agrees to donate the land for those things. So that's the reason I asked that question. It looks to me like there's going to have to be conversations. There's going to have to be sewer substations Is that already covered in the agreement that the landowner will donate those?
That's a very good point and a very good question. Just to reiterate that this is at the master planning stage. This is not granting entitlements, and the big distinction there is those facilities like fire stations or that are constructed by developers, often in large properties, are done in exchange for granting of entitlements. Because this is at the master planning, comprehensive planning stage, there is no granting of entitlements. So that would be a one-sided exchange. And so that's why things like that are not in this plan currently. I mean, there are possibly ways to incorporate further public facilities or for further discussion than what's already in the text. But I think it's important to note that typically in a development, that's when those entitlements are granted, or when those public facilities are then agreed to be constructed by a developer. So we're just at a different stage.
So it's your expectation that these will be part of the PUDs, the individual PUDs as they come forward? If someone wishes to develop a piece of property, the location of a fire station would be discussed at that point, and that developer would have to donate the property, or the taxpayers would have to pay for that property. You see, this is the way we save taxpayers money, is that we cite these things and get these agreements. But I don't know how that works. I mean, it's beyond my experience. So this is just a question of how that legitimately and logically would happen, that the public is not going to have the cost of the property for these needed facilities like fire stations, pump stations for the sewer, that kind of thing, water towers.
Just to note, everyone, we are at the time for this session. We have hit the extra 30 minutes. I want to be respectful of everybody that's here. And I know this is a great conversation. Artie, is there any way to get any of this information potentially from Robert that we may be able to pass along at some point?
Well, Devin, I was going to say, I
Can
think
I ask
that's
a
a good
question about
question.
entitlement? I mean, I thought the whole content.
Hold on, Pam. Pam, hold on. Robert was speaking.
I just wanted to say, I think
Gave
that's a good
entitlement.
question that would be directed towards staff, would be best.
Say that one more time, Robert.
The last question that Ms. Lightsey raised, I think would be best directed towards staff.
All right. Thank you, Robert.
I know that I can answer that question.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I think we have some good input today, and that these things can be reflected in, there's a section of the master plan about public services and facilities that we can update and include and address some of these comments, because I think these are important things that we do address. It may not be at the level of identifying,
And I
you know,
about no entitlement. Sorry.
Go ahead, Pam.
I'm confused about the no entitlements. This is a comp, and I don't mean to contradict you, Robert. The comp plan amendment is giving tremendous entitlements.
So the comp plan sets
It's going
the.
rural. It's a comp plan amendment. It goes rural to PD, which is from 1 unit per 10 acres to 20 units per acre, and it moves the urban services line. These are a huge increase in the development capacity of the land. Entitlement means, but that to me becomes, if zoning is an entitlement, then none of this is. But that sounds like to me that's adding tremendous value to the land by increasing the capacity for development rights on it, regardless of all the infrastructure stuff.
That's a good question.
Absolutely correct. I would second that. These are huge entitlements that are increased the property value tremendously.
Artie, do you want to get us wrapped up so we can wrap this session up?
What was that, Devin?
Do you want to wrap us up on this session so that way we can get everybody back? I know everyone's got other things they got to get back to as well. I know some of our staff have other meetings, so just want to make sure they're able to get to those.
Yeah. We can continue this conversation a little bit later. It is convoluted just because that's how the development process is in Florida. The comp plan sets the parameters and talks about allowances, and so we are increasing the overall allowances in this area, but it is at the zoning and the PUD level that you actually get legal entitlements. And the kind of distinction is a little bit nuanced, I understand. That's what happens when you have a lot of different layers of things. But yeah, you can have a land use category that has a certain allowance, but until you have that zoning on the property that may or may not go up to that maximum allowance, like for example, the suburban land use category has a maximum allowance of 20 units per acre, but the zoning might be like R1 or something, and I can't remember exactly what the entitlements are, but it's only like 3.8 units per acre or something like that. So you don't always get what the maximum allowance is, you get what's entitled. And so those are some nuances. And I understand the conversation about wanting to make sure that the taxpayer is not paying for like land for a fire station if not necessary. On the other hand, if we did it based on it now versus what the entitlements are kind of at the PUD level, we may expect a development that's significantly higher than what would happen, and then the city or whoever construct a fire station that is well beyond what is needed, and the ongoing maintenance of overbuilding may exceed the amount that is bought by the land. So there's a lot of nuance here, and we can continue these conversations. There is available capacity in future sessions, and so I encourage people to sign up. If you see one that says it's full, just reach out to me directly. I can probably add you. We're just trying to make sure that we had a small enough group that everyone has a chance to speak, which would not be possible if we had a lot of people on the call at the same time.
Artie, one quick question. When are we going to get the answers to these questions?
I mean, I'm doing the best I can, but I have a lot of these meetings, so it'll just be when I can pull things together between charrettes, honestly. So I'll try to get it to you as quickly as I can.
And the special topic meetings, they're going to be in addition to these meetings that are already scheduled. Is that correct?
Yes, they would be separate from these.
Okay. If somebody could add on this map where the main sewer lines are now, if there are any going out Miccosukee Road. I mean, I can see where the sewer lines are on the north side of this, but this whole southern boundary, I don't understand where the sewer lines are there, and that's a big issue.
So Artie, with that, I think I'm just going to have to go ahead and get us to end this one, but I want to let everybody know that you do have the other option to go to. Artie just released the second part of this on yesterday, I think it came out, or Tuesday, and you can go take the survey online and do the second part of the virtual meetings. Feel free to do those and leave us any messages that you have for that or any comments to that survey. And I really appreciate everybody's comments and being here today, and thanks for everybody's input.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of great comments. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Hey, Robert.
Robert.